So tonight, Claudia Rankine, Jonathan Gray, Jennifer Uleman, and Julia Elena will discuss the ways in which blondness, as a marker of whiteness, has developed mobility across racial and class lines. What do we attribute to blondness? What are we participating in by allowing for its normalization? And to whom and how much does it matter? And so our four presenters, Claudia Rankine, who will go first, is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including Citizen and American Lyric and Don't Let Me Be Lonely, 2 plays, most recently or 3 plays, most recently The White Card, which is going to be published by Grey Wolf in March, I believe, and numerous video collaborations, and is also the editor of several anthologies, including The Racial Imaginary, Writers on Race in the Life and the Mind. In 2016, Rankine co-founded the Racial Imaginary Institute. She is the chancellor of the Academy of American Poets and teaches at Yale University as the Frederick Eisenman Professor of Poetry. And then we'll have Jonathan W. Gray, who's right here. Jonathan Gray is Associate Professor of English in the CUNY Graduate Center and John Jay College, is working on post-World War II American culture, African American literary production, popular culture, comic books, graphic novels, and other narratives of visual culture. His first book, Civil Rights in the White Literary Imagination, traces the white literary responses to the period between the Brown case and the death of Martin Luther King. His forthcoming project, Illustrating the Race, investigates how the twin understandings of illustration, the creative act of depiction and the political act of bringing forth for public consideration, function in the representation of African Americans in comic and graphic narratives published since 1966. Jennifer Uleman, our third presenter, teaches philosophy at SUNY Purchase College. A member of the Racial Imaginary Institute and a Kant scholar, she also writes and teaches about gender, photography, classical logic, politics, performance, and Hegel, which is a funny way to end that. She's currently at work on a book about whiteness and is Purchase College's 2018 to 2020 Doris and Carl Kempner Distinguished Professor. She lives in Jackson Heights, Queens. And finally, we'll hear from Julia Elena. Julia was born and raised in Louisiana and trained at Aveda Cosmetology School. Color has always been a valued part of her life. She has been fascinated by the color spectrum since she could pick up a crayon. Julia moved to New York 4 years ago to pursue her career as a hair colorist. Refinery 29 named her one of New York City's colorists who will give you the best hair of your life. She works at Hair Story, that's a plug. Her mission is an important one. She helps her clients realize the true identity through hair color. So thank you to all of our presenters in advance, and I'll call up Claudia. Thanks all.
I decided I'm not going to read anything. I'm just going to stand here for 20 minutes. No. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for coming out in the heat, in the summer, in the dog days. And thanks to Pioneer Works. You know, we have been associated with Pioneer Works in the last however long, and it has been such a pleasure. So you all should find a way to be associated with Pioneer Works, even if you have to pay $8 or whatever it is a month. So I'm going to be the comic relief because every evening deserves one, just so you know what's happening. Complicit freedoms. It was unusual at these academic events to find myself at a table populated by people of color. But here I was at a well-attended, formal dinner attempting to pass itself off as an intimate supper, surrounded by other black women and a few black men. Sometimes these meals are an opportunity for faculty to visit and catch up about the kids or the terror in the department or the bits and pieces that give nothing away, but a random day's activity. But sometimes these meals are disguised Q&A slotted into the dinner hour. What gives the dinner's lack of informality away is the simple fact that when someone speaks on the other end of the long table, everyone listens. This means the complete guest list hears because they're waiting to hear the woman inquire about what to tell her Black female students who bleach their hair blonde. The professor doesn't offer up the name of her course, but I imagine a room full of Black blondes in a class entitled The History of Black Power Movements, or Angela Davis to Audre Lorde to Kimberly Crenshaw, Politics of Resistance, or Becky with the Good Hair, Call Out Culture in the 21st Century. The one who asks the question is sharply, and this actually happened, I'm not so good to make things up. The one who asks the question is sharply attentive and carries worry on her face as if her students' grooming choices were a reflection of her very being, which is not coincidentally tied to her teaching. The sun has set, and given the opportunity, at any given moment, I could close my eyes and not open them for another 8 hours. But in the moment, the professor's almond-colored eyes are waiting for an answer, and the room waits with her. I could say, we expect too much from each other, but that's not an answer. I could dodge the question with bell hooks pretty much covered this in straightening our hair. I tried to remember what Hook said, and the phrase, "come correct," comes to mind, though I don't think it's from that essay. Instead of an answer, I find myself identifying with the scolded and falling into a defensive posture by asking in a tone that sounds more like a statement than a question, whether the abandonment of their natural hair color is of equal importance to the safeguarding of their sense of agency and freedom. I asked the professor this by telling her, and she nods the way one does nod when someone brings up First Amendment rights, after some overt white supremacist wants to demonstrate on the mainstream of one town's. Some things should matter more, no matter the law, no matter our individual freedoms, no matter. That's what she won't say aloud, but that is what the nod manages to signify. Her silence makes me want to try again, and in any case, we are in this room together until someone brings something too sweet. Perhaps somewhere beneath it all, where the all is every mother, aunt, teacher, Michelle Obama moment of Black exceptional, straightened shoulder length, Madam C. Walker hair beauty, is the nagging belief that blondes have more of something. We have been told this all our decades, though no one was talking especially to us. Meaning, of course, Black women, since all the women are white, though we are a part of the we in the gender conversations the media has with Americans in the commercials, films, and ads bombarding us. Blonde hair need not mean human. It need not mean feminine. It need not mean Anglo or angel, clearly. It doesn't mean white purity, given a change in hair color doesn't cause anyone Black or Asian, or white for that matter, to pass out of his or her body. Aretha Franklin is, after all, with any hair color, still the mother of soul. All the money, time, and possible damage to one's natural hair ultimately pales in comparison to what it means to take what is available and own it, complicit freedoms. Perhaps the students' blondness is their boldness in the face of racist propaganda around beauty ideals. Then the black blondes, I think I have an image there, upstairs, are inside one of those equations where no matter what you do, on either side of the equal sign, every sum comes to one, this one, what I want, fuck you, fuck me, next, do you, boo, free to be, free to take, free to fake, frivolous, aren't I the definition of fun, fuck brave, absolutely, abso-fucking-lutely, fun, funny, unless of course it's a zero-sum game. Then a question that is also an answer comes to me. What would Frantz Fanon say? I asked the professor. She laughs, which pleases me because now she looks like she's forgetting to care about for a few seconds. It might be a failing that I want people to lose their humorlessness, but I badly do want them to perform a kind of meta-perspective humor around all that goes into our scramble to make a life. Mine is always the worry that we are already dying, I mean already dead, yet pacing around in a final state of eternal judgment, so stuck, judged, or judging. Which of course is humorless, and that scares me. It scares me more than bottle blondes and bleach blondes and the happy-go-luckiness the blondness is meant to signify. If it is meant to signify, and not mass self-hatred and low self-esteem. Does bleaching hair blonde mean one is reaching for something, someone, some other body in a fantasy of white, pleasing pleasantness? Most definitely blondes have more blondness, and this must mean something. The worry is that this particular hair color promises the world to these women and men, though it cannot give it. It allows them to be seen, maybe to be seen for the first time as human, youthful, beautiful, human, and did I say human in their own eyes? Clairol, I found this, I have to play it, oh. I'm looking for something. Oh, it's not there. Clairol claims blondes do have more fun because the color adds energy to your hair. Not sure what that means. By softening your facial features, making you look more youthful. Their website states that people will wonder if it's really you. They add an exclamation point after really you because we know it's not really, really you. And the moment will always need the added insistence of the exclamation. I want the mention of Fanon to gesture to his psychoanalytic writings on internalized anti-Black racism and suggest to the professor that I understand that her worry is that these women are blindly filling with self-hatred for their own Black skin and natural hair color because after a while, the colonizer doesn't have to be in the room. There's a photograph of Carrie Mae Weems looking into the proverbial mirror on the wall, though she's holding a handheld one. The piece is called What Have I Done to Make You Hate Me So Much? That's actually a different piece. This one says, looking into the mirror, the Black woman asks, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the finest of them all? The mirror says, Snow White, you black bitch, and don't you forget it. That's a different piece. I don't ask the professor if she knows the piece, but to ask Carrie's question unconsciously might lead to the bleaching and not bleaching of one's hair. It all depends on what happened or is happening behind the watchful eyes of her students. The professor's worry, I am surmising or guessing here, is that the culture has damaged her students despite our Black women in the Middle Ages' best practices and efforts with our own natural hair. By extension, we older Black women are shattered, since the younger ones are our daughters, not literally. And for all our Black is beautiful rhetoric, deep within their sense of self is a kernel of desire for this idolized blonde beauty that so many white women umber their way towards because the world treats them better and pays them more and marries them faster. Apparently, blonde women get higher salaries and marry men with more money, according to the research that was done. What is this? I don't know. Oh, this is a Clairol. I was looking for that. It's out of place.
George.
Marge?
George.
Marge.
George.
Marge.
George.
Don't worry, George. Naturally blonde covers so naturally and lasts so beautifully. Yet it works so simply. After lightening, it just shampoos in.
George.
Marge?
George.
Marge. Marge.
George.
Marge. Marge.
George.
Marge.
George.
Marge.
Marge.
Marge. Marge.
George.
Marge.
Naturally blonde, now in 18 shades, by Clairol, naturally.
George.
It works, y'all. So white women don't even bother coloring their roots or the back of their heads where the natural hair color still resides, unless they have their movie stars or news commentators or politicians or celebrity tennis players, and their job is to be the object of white male desire or men of color desire and white female desire and women of color desire plus all female aspiration. This is reductive and not. The not refers to the fact that all women, not just Black women, might be dogged by the sneaking suspicion that they are failing at life without blondness, since so many white women are also bleaching their hair because it's fundamentally necessary. As a blonde, I became myself, so many say. I think I have.
Kind of like try to find who you are, like you experiment with the way you look, and I just bleached my hair and I was like, oh, so that's me. And that was it. When I bleached my hair, yeah.
When you bleached it blonde, you thought that's you? And can you bring... So many, I conducted, I would think, over 100 of these interviews. And many white women said, you know, once I bleached my hair blonde, I saw myself. I was myself finally. What that means, I don't know. The professor nods when I say, oh, where am I? Funny, if you say, I want to be myself, and the culture says that self that matters is blonde, then oh well, too bad, so be it. After a while, everyone is in agreement about who looks human, youthful, beautiful, human, and did I say human? The professor nods again when I say I believe it's important the students do what they want until they understand for themselves what they don't want. I am a mother, and before that I was a daughter with a memory. She doesn't smile when I stop speaking. Instead, she opens her mouth as if to say something, but closes it just as quickly. Someone on the other side of the table says, she wore heels, even though her feet hurt. Okay. Some of us didn't, says another woman, and I can't but think there is a backstory there I will never know. Heels versus nose jobs, different things. Skin bleaching is clear in terms of its destination. Is blondness the heel, the nose job, the skin bleaching, or none of the above? This culture made us, and as wrong or as right as we can be, we know someone is always looking. Amen to that, I don't say, as 4 men arrive with trays of cake, vanilla ice cream already melting into the dark chocolate, though life is not always sweet. And I'll end with this. Which has nothing to do with blondness, by the way.
Really? I wouldn't bullshit about this. She wanted to know which one was the most educated. But instead she said, wait for it, she said, which one sounded white?
There's good reason for my glistening skin, and how I shine, and how my pores are so clean and clear. I spring from activity to activity. I love my job. I love my life.
I could picture how much more confident and attractive I would feel with whiter skin.
Whiteness is proof that marketing can repair anyone. If whiteness was to be believed, whiteness was equal to goodness, intelligence, truth, beauty. Need anyone go on?
I love white. White is clean. White is pure. White is beautiful.
Whiteness was constructed to be a general superiority in all things. The best advertisement for whiteness is whiteness's systemic ability to keep whiteness alive. Whiteness sells life. If anyone doesn't have whiteness, then anyone is negotiating how to stay alive.
I don't believe that I can have instant white skin.
Instant?
Pwede ba yun? Instant, like, no. That's not true.
No.
White plus papaya only takes a week. Helps make my skin so white plus papaya. My skin so white.
The new woman is remarkable. She enjoys a full-time career in independence. She knows her colors by heart, taking charge of the radiant white skin she wears.
The brilliance in most anyone is anyone has the beauty to repulse whiteness. For the most part, anyone shouldn't need to be convinced of this.
Sorry, tall. Okay, so before I begin, I want to thank Claudia for setting up the Racial Imaginary Institute and provoking so much thought and conversation about whiteness. I also want to thank Pioneer for providing this forum and this space. And in advance, I want to thank Jennifer and Julia for their contributions to the discussion to come. So, what do we attribute to blondness, and where do we think it will take us? Blondness is a shifting signifier that transmits different connotations depending on its context. I want to point to a particularly submerged meaning of blondness, which links the hair color with rebellion. This understanding of blondness, as rebellion continues to resonate in interesting ways, though few today would immediately associate blondness with nonconformity, I think as Claudia so eloquently demonstrated. This, I suspect, is due to a gendered conception of rebellious blondness, the way that blondness remains usually an unspoken attribute when describing men. Still, while a connection between blondness and insurrection seems counterintuitive, when I inform you that this linkage depends on blondness' proximity to blackness, which is to say an intimacy between blonde men and the outlaw black body, the path to blonde rebellion may begin to be more clear. The connection between blondness and rebellion, at least in the post-World War II American context, derives from one cultural touchstone, James Dean. Audiences identified with the actor's restless and searching portrayal of Jim Stark in Rebel Without a Cause, though the 1955 film was ostensibly about the social ennui and the generational gap between the boomers and the so-called greatest generation. The movie's title derives from Robert Linder's psychoanalytic examination of the psychopath. Here. This was published in 1944, though the movie's plot barely alludes to Linder's subtext. And, come back. Indeed, few attempted to trace the connection between Linder's treatise on criminal irrationality, the post-war popularity of James Dean, and juvenile delinquency. And here we have possibly the most iconic picture of Dean with him smoking. This today would be inconceivable. We would never have an image of a popular actor smoking. And in fact, if you go on Google image search, most of the times they're cropping it so you can't see the cigarette. So I had to click and click and click until I found the proper one. But again, so Dean here is the juvenile delinquent par excellence. He's the rebellious young man, right? And yet, Norman Mailer, and I'm just gonna go backwards and forwards for a second between Dean and Norman Mailer, so we can see the sort of aesthetic pull that, that Dean exhibited, right? We should remember that in the mid-1950s, authors were most often photographed wearing suits and fedoras, right? And so for Mailer to present himself in this way is very much an homage to, to Dean, who by the time this picture is taken, it has already passed away, right? And so, but we can see the sort of aesthetic pull of the blonde rebel here, right? Okay, so Mailer was perhaps the only intellectual who sought to reconcile the popularity of the enigmatic and recently deceased Dean with the conformity of the 1950s. And he accomplished this by linking Dean to the emerging civil rights movement in his infamous essay, The White Negro. The White Negro appears in 1957, which is to say after Dean's death made him a generational icon, and also after Brown versus Board of Education, after Emmett Till's murder in Money, Mississippi, and after the onset of the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, and perhaps most importantly for Mailer, after Ralph Ellison's novel Invisible Man became both a critical and commercial phenomenon. The White Negro is Mailer's attempt to make a connection between what was then called Negro unrest and the generational split emblematized by Dean. And Mailer's essay his essay attempts this reconciliation by insisting that the disaffected youth drawn to the fallen actor and dismayed by the crushing conformity of the 1950s should identify with Black Americans living under segregation. So I'm going to read that again. Mailer's essay attempts to reconcile the generational gap by insisting that that disaffected youth drawn to the fallen actor and dismayed by the crushing conformity of the 1950s identify with Black Americans living in segregation. Mailer arrives at this conclusion via circuitous logic. He notes that the violence of World War II was followed immediately by the Cold War and the anxiety-inducing space race, and that the threat of genocidal violence has produced a silent generation. For Mailer, the solution to this is clear. White Americans must seek new experience. It is on this, and this is obviously a long quote, which I will read since I'm partially in the way. It is on this bleak scene that a phenomenon has appeared. The American existentialist, the hipster, the man who knows that if our collective condition is to live with instant death by atomic war, relatively quick death by the state as concentration camp, or with slow death by conformity with every creative and rebellious insect stifled, if the fate of 20th century man is to live with death from adolescence to premature senescence, why then the only life-giving answer is to accept the terms of death, to live with death as immediate danger, to divorce oneself from society, to exist without roots, to set out on that uncharted journey into the rebellious imperatives of the self. But Mailer's hipster, his American existentialist, must learn to, if he must learn to flourish while, quote, accepting the terms of death, then he must take this object lesson from the Negro. This symbiotic relationship between Black objection and white freedom lies at the center of this text. Mailer claims that, quote, the source of the hip, for which we get the word hipster, is the Negro, and that one might avoid the conformist traps of the 1950s by, quote, absorbing the existential synapses of the Negro. Once this cultural appropriation occurs, the hipster will also be able to, quote, accept the terms of death as immediate danger, divorce oneself from society, and exist without roots. So what we have here is rebellion as independence, rebellion as a severing from community, rebellion as delicious white freedom. So, in Mailer's rather benighted reading of American history, Black Americans have been living under the threat of death since the moment they arrived on these shores. And of course, we should pause here and say that whatever else we think about his assertions here, his account of the externalities facing the Black community is largely correct. Indeed, as Claudia noted in an essay published in the New York Times in 2014, quote, the condition of Black life is one of mourning. But where Black writers and intellectuals from Frederick Douglass to Du Bois to Fannie Lou Hamer to Ta-Nehisi Coates and to Sister Rankine have insisted that the United States reform itself, correct this problem, Mailer seems largely unconcerned with the efficacy of the civil rights movement. He's much more interested in what progressive white Americans can extract from the Black freedom struggle. How proximity to Blackness might allow the hipster insight into, quote, the rebellious imperatives of the self. Mailer's essay, originally published in Dissent magazine, proved so popular that Irving Howe had it printed as a this is the cover. Irving Howe had it printed as a pamphlet, and it became ubiquitous on college campuses and underground bookstores and head shops in the late 50s into the 60s. Indeed, such was its enduring popularity that Mailer's contemporary, James Baldwin, felt compelled to respond to the white Negro 4 years after its publication. And so here, this is I sort of found this online. This is the mock-up of the cover. And if you sort of see midway down the page, it says, well, you can't really read it here, but you can see it here. The Black Boy Looks at the White Boy by James Baldwin. In the original article, the name Norman Mailer is sort of crossed out. When they reposted it, they added Mailer because of context, but in 1961, everyone would have known who Baldwin was referring to here, right? So, with characteristic insight, Baldwin identifies why this essay proved so indispensable to white co-eds across the nation, but useless to Black Americans engaged, then as now, in a struggle to live as human beings in the nation of their birth. He dismissed the substance of Mailer's argument when he noted, quote, "The thing that most white people imagine they can salvage from the storm of life is really, in some, their innocence." However, unlike white Americans questing for purpose via an affiliation with Blackness, quote, "I know how power works. It has worked on me. And if I didn't know how power works, I would be dead." Baldwin here addresses an unanswered question that occurs early in the white Negro, one that Mailer poses and then breezily moves past. And this is the sort of famous opening paragraph. If tens of millions were killed in concentration camps, out of the inexorable agonies and contradictions of superstates founded upon the always insoluble contradictions of injustice, one, which is to say a white one was then obliged also to see that no matter how crippled and perverted an image of man was the society he had created, it was nonetheless his creation, his collective creation. And if society was so murderous, then who could ignore the most hideous of questions about his own nature? So again, if World War II, like World War I, is a product of quote-unquote white civilization, then what does that say about whiteness? How can we come to terms with the implications here? But again, Mailer poses this question and then doesn't pick it up again, right? If the miserable state of the nation in 1957 or 1961 or 1997 or 2018 was largely the result of domestic policies that enjoyed significant popular support, then the only way to address this was not by a retreat to individual exploration of the self, which is what Mailer's calling for, but by an engagement with the community, an engagement with the collective, right? And so again, just to return here, again, the best answer to this, again, are these two lines from different points in Baldwin's essay, that what white people want is innocence, and that what white people don't want is a true understanding of how power works in the world. Mailer's essay and Baldwin's response define the contours of masculine blonde rebellion, which is to say post-war hipsterism, an inward-looking journey that derives virtue from its proximity to Blackness, even as it remains largely unconcerned about the fate of actual Black people. But the desire for innocence and a retreat from the messy entanglements of community seems an increasingly widespread want, leading men of color in the wake of James Dean to adopt the pose of the white Negro. So, while white masculine entertainers adopt blondness to signal their bravado and their proximity to Blackness, and here's one example, this is the Beastie Boys. And look at Ad Rock's haircut, by the way. That's like, he had to go to a Black barbershop to get that haircut. But you can see with MCA, the blondness, right? So if white masculine entertainers adopt blondness to signal their bravado, you knew he was coming, and their connection to Blackness, Black entertainers adopt blondness to highlight their individuality and innocence after encountering controversy. So here's one example of a Black individual who sort of courts blondness in order to remove himself. And here's a more famous one. Okay. In one community, in the white community, thank you for laughing, because I was hoping people would laugh at that. In the white community, blonde rebellion suggests a self-indulgent, personal political engagement, reflecting Mailer's evocation of James Dean, while in the Black community, it suggests a retreat from politics, a refusal to engage in Baldwin's unsparing critique. Because time is short, and because pictures are far more eloquent than words, I'll close by asking you to consider two images from 2016. Both of these men are self-proclaimed geniuses, but one positions his art within a community at risk and at war, and remains concerned with the way that power operates on his black body, while the other increasingly seems removed from these concerns. Which is to say that one adopts James Deanian masculine blondness, while the other doesn't. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I also want to thank Pioneer Works and thank all the other speakers and thank everyone. I'm very, very happy to be here and very excited about this. So, asked to think about blondness. Hang on one sec. Asked to think about blondness, I think about myself and Nietzsche. I'm going to go psychoanalytic, sort of. I'm going to talk about how youth and innocence get transformed into blonde beastliness. And I'm going to blame Nietzsche, although he hardly worked alone. On the sidewalk in front of our house in East Lansing, 1970-ish, a stern neighbor comments on my blonde hair. I'm maybe 5. She won't keep it. I feel my dark-haired mother's silence, and I don't understand. Or I do, or I come to, pulling from the meanings that are and that will become available to me, so that this memory becomes a potent memory of being doomed, of doom foretold. Me at 4, me at 9, me at 17 with my mother. I hate the neighbor. In my memory, I hate her. She has foretold loss of whatever semblance of innocence, prettiness, happiness, and carefree playfulness my childhood wants to claim. Do I sense something sadistic? Maybe. I grasp, in any event, that my hair signals youthful innocence, prettiness, happiness, careful playfulness. Absurdly, to be sure, most children don't have blonde hair, but I grasp this. In college, I major in philosophy. I read Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. I read in the first essay that conquering races, noble races, throughout history have all been fundamentally blonde. As he writes, the word designating the aristocracy and finally the good, noble, pure was originally a blonde person. It was the word that meant a blonde person, he claims. I read a little later in the same essay about the blonde's, quote, powerful physicality, a blossoming, rich, even effervescent good health that includes the things needed to maintain it: war, adventure, hunting, dancing, jousting, and everything else that contains strong, free, happy action. End of quote. Rude health, a joy. I'm fascinated by the expression rude health because I think it's the connection between ruddiness or red-skinnedness and that kind of healthiness. But anyway, I'm the oldest child in my family. It's very important when I'm very young that I never be angry. In college, I bleached my short hair. I want to look like Penelope Houston in The Avengers, angry, punk rock, feminist, but also vulnerable like a tow-headed boy, a girl boy. This is Penelope Houston in The Avengers, LA punk band. I hope blondness, all of this is true at the same time. I hope blondness will soften me. Serious intellectual philosophy major me, signaling something childlike, innocent, open. At the same time, I hope it will protect me, make me look knowing and edgy. It's my yearbook photo from college. My bleached hair does not try to look natural. It winks, promising to grow up soon, but not just yet, begging or insisting on a reprieve. Nietzsche, again from the first essay, a passage on what happens when noble races, as he calls them, are freed from Judeo-Christian slave morality, as Nietzsche calls it, as Nietzsche calls familiar demands for humility, consideration, doing unto others as you'd have them do unto you, etc., demands to enter a social contract, demands Nietzsche has been arguing throughout the genealogy of morals. This is the project of the genealogy of morals. He's been arguing that these demands are fabricated in conniving resentment by the weak who are plotting to inherit the earth. The passage makes an amazing set of maneuvers. So I'm about to read a longer passage. The passage makes an amazing set of maneuvers, delivering a psychologically seductive way to conceive an adult human being. There were so many resonances with the things that have already been said, but this passage that I'm about to show you and read makes an amazing set of maneuvers, delivering a psychologically seductive way to conceive an adult human being as at once murderous and innocent. In the world outside, he writes, freed from every social constraint, and he's talking now about the noble races, they return to the innocent conscience of the wild beast as exultant monsters, who perhaps go away having committed a hideous succession of murder, arson, rape, and torture in a mood of bravado and spiritual equilibrium as though they had simply played a student's prank. At the center of all these noble races, we cannot fail to see the beast of prey, the magnificent blonde beast avidly prowling round for spoil and victory. This hidden center needs release from time to time. The beast must out again, must return to the wild. Okay, so there's so much to say about what Nietzsche does here, repellently, seductively, given that it is 1887, that Heart of Darkness is published in 12 years, that everything, terrifyingly, that he does here terrifyingly, that he does here completely assholically, I wrote. It made me think, so it makes us think a lot of things. It made my friend Rudy think about Trump and Boris Johnson. It made me think about my own destructive fantasies. But the point here, it creates a story about aggression that is innocent, that can't help itself. Not even just like a child can't, but like an animal can't. Nietzsche consolidates an already highly culturally mediated and artificially amplified connection between blondness and youth, the absurdity of the widespreadness of that connection, right? Given that some people have that, but not most children. Nietzsche consolidates an already highly culturally mediated and artificially amplified connection between blondness and youth, blondness and free, happy action, and makes blondness inhuman and innocent. I feel sick. I think of an earlier set of lines from the same text. Enough, enough, I can't bear it any longer. Bad air, bad air. This workshop where ideals are fabricated, it seems to me to stink of lies. Of course, Nietzsche's talking about the workshop where Judeo-Christian ideals are fabricated, but okay. The Oxford English Dictionary tells us that blonde, the word, has referred to yellow hair since it entered English from Old French in the 15th century, and may also have initially referred to dyed hair, so that the word for blonde didn't only mean yellow, but in fact specifically also meant dyed hair. And now I quote from the Oxford English Dictionary, the ancient Germans being accustomed to dye the hair yellow, unquote. Wikipedia tells me that 75% of women and 18% of men living in Copenhagen report dyeing their hair. And, this is all in the hair coloring entry, and that Diodorus Siculus, the Greek historian of the 1st century BCE, noted of Celts, also known as Gauls, also known as Northern Europeans generally, that, quote, their hair is blonde, but not naturally so. They bleach it to this day, artificially, to this day in the 1st century BCE. They bleach it to this day, artificially, washing it in lime and combing it back from their foreheads. They look like wood demons, their hair thick and shaggy like a horse's mane. Blondness as an always already manufactured innocence. Okay, so how to conclude? So you see, I thought about myself, this connection with youth that people cite when they think about why they're bleaching their hair, et cetera, et cetera. And then this crazy Nietzsche blonde beast idea. So how to conclude? I don't really know, but I will just say this. We should all get to have real childhoods, even to feel like lions sometimes. But no one should feel doomed on the sidewalks by the pervasive, bad, and dangerous air of a fabricated story about who is innocent and who is not, or by a fabricated trajectory in which growing up, losing innocence, she won't keep it. Losing ignorance, learning to live right with others is a lamentable loss of freedom, something to be fought with bleach and will, rather than what it could be, namely a chance to become a human grown-up. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Ooh. Wow, I am speechless. This was really interesting to hear what you all had to say, and I just want to say thank you so much for letting me be a part of this. And I'm going to be honest, I'm really nervous right now. The last time I did a presentation, it was actually for the Color Project, and it hasn't even started. I just had my notes and my ideas, and I was pitching this to the studio that I work with to see if they wanted to be involved. So, my voice might get shaky, I might forget what I'm gonna say, or I might start dancing to feel better about myself. Just bear with me. So, my name is Julia Elena. I am a hair colorist, and I have been fascinated with the color spectrum since, I don't know, since I was a little girl. So it's no surprise to me that I do hair color as a profession. Working in a studio versus a salon has allowed me to be mindful, to question myself and others, and to think more of the why and what I do. As you all know, or may not know, and I think now you know, color is important. It's how we see things. Color affects our mood and changes our behavior. And I can give you 2 examples. Mine is a little bit light. So imagine going outside in the daylight and take away the buildings, and you're surrounded by huge trees, grass, and flowers. Just talking about it, I feel peaceful, I feel energetic, I feel renewed. And I'm sure, like, when you even go out there, you feel that, like, just being around, like, the trees and the grass and flowers, you just kind of forget all the stress and just have that moment. Another example was 2 weeks ago. I wasn't feeling well, and I was at my boyfriend's place, and he has these really cool hue lights that can change color through an app. This app is really awesome because it has every color of the spectrum. So I turned on the lights, and I saw hot pink. And I just like, I don't want to look at this color, I feel nauseous. So I went on the app, and I changed it to a lilac color. And I felt calm. I went from feeling nauseous to feeling calm. Now, if something as such as changing the color of the lights or seeing greenery can affect my mood, imagine having color on your hair. Now, what does that mean? I don't even know. But that's why I did this project, because I'm in the search of knowing. I'm curious. So, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so a couple of years back, when you would go to a salon and you would get a cut or color, or you would get both, you would go in there wanting to get something that was considered beautiful. It was about acceptance, or feeling accepted and fitting in. Now, with the clients that I have, it's more about freeing themselves from basically what the society thinks or consider is beautiful, and to be their authentic self. So that's why we recognize this shift, because we see it. I mean, you just saw this, like everyone you see on the streets, especially now, you see blonde hair. Or you see colorful hair, which is what I like to do. And we're curious and we have questions, and that's why we're here right now. For about 2 years, I've been having clients that are open and discussing more than just hair. For hairdressers, one of our jobs involves a thing called a consultation. Now, most of you may know, if you ever go to a salon, that's what they do. And it's important because it's an opportunity for me to understand the person that's in front of me, to ask questions, and to get to know one another. Sorry, guys. So all of this has led to this question. Well, the question that I've been asking, because I've been doing color for 4 years, and you can't help, like, as a hairdresser, you're like, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing here? Am I doing something good in the world? And hair is so important to us. Like, I don't know why, but it is. There's something emotional about it. I mean, like, if you're sick and you have cancer and you lose your hair, it's like a big thing. So, before I show you the project, I just want to talk a little bit about the process. I'm nervous right now, so you can imagine what it was like. The beginning, I was going up to strangers on the street, and I was going up to people with interesting hair color, and the first time I did it, I was so nervous. I was circling around Union Square, which felt like an hour. I was like, oh my God, like, how can I go up to this person? Or I don't know what to say. So I finally had the courage to go up to someone, and all I could remember was I didn't even know what my mind was going through, but I was just talking really fast. And I was just thinking to myself, okay, if I talk really fast, this will be over soon. So I would introduce myself, I would introduce the project, and if they were interested, I would interview them and photograph them. So this is all living on Instagram. Then I paused that because I started having clients who were interested in being a part of the project. So I would change their color, and then I would, I'm hoping I didn't change it, and then I would interview them and photograph them. So on the first photo that you'll see, it's someone that I reached out on the street. No, it's not the first person that I reached out that I was like freaking out. The second one is also someone that I reached out, but the photo didn't come out well because I use a film. So I reached out to her again, and I asked if she wanted to be a part of the project, and she said yes. And the rest of the photos and videos are also of my clients. So this is Tinray. I need my glasses. Okay, so Tinray said, I grew up in China, and at school, they don't allow hair color. So right after high school, I started dyeing my hair. I'm pursuing a more artistic way to express myself, and that's why I colored my hair. It's important to realize you are unique. You're not like everyone else. I just want to show how different I am. Nadira. Probably gonna move here. I believe identity is very fluid, and it allows for constant evolution. We are the only people that are in control of our own identities. So it's important for us to feel and express ourselves as genuine as possible. That's why I think hair color is pretty fun and creative way to express and identify ourselves. Elias. I started having conversations with friends about gender presentation. So coloring my hair came in part from thinking about how to integrate this kind of aesthetic and create some more space to move and to be perceived. I'm a cis man, but I've always been wary of the aggressive bravado and violence I associate with traditional masculinity. Leslie. As a professional dancer, I've been trying to figure out my identity in the field. I'm Black, curvaceous, not too short or tall, not classical or traditional, but at the same time, I have a technical training. Where do I fit? There were only a small handful of role models for me, and by simply following this dream and performing in the contemporary art world, as well as making work, feels radical and important. Why? Because my body is being seen so that the identity of a modern New York dancer can be rewritten. And this is Faz.
I have often chased after this question like Alice lost in the garden maze. Who am I? I'm Pakistani, but I was raised all over the globe. My mother tongue is Urdu, but my English is stronger. People are often confused about where I'm from, what I am. People want to put me in a box. For a long time, I tried to find a box to fit into. I contorted and conformed, but I couldn't fit anywhere. And then I thought, why would I want to be trapped in a box? I'm more fluid now. I'm not the subject of questions because as a journalist and filmmaker, I'm the one who asks the questions. And I'm not searching for answers, but rather seeking to find transparency through the boxes people hide in, hoping they will reveal themselves and come out.
And then last, Jordan.
I kind of feel as though our main purpose in each lifetime is to find our identity, to find something we identify with, identify as, something within ourselves that is undeniable. I realized one day that I did not actually exist without art, that there is no proof of my presence or echo of my sounds without my art. Identity is important to me because it's the purest part of who I am.
That's it, guys. Thank you so much.
So
career for different perspectives on blondness. And so we thought we would have a little bit of a conversation among ourselves and then open it out for questions. Cool? Cool. Okay. Doesn't matter. That's what we're doing. I'll just ask one question to each person, and then you all can think what you would like to ask. So, Jonathan, I was really interested in the idea, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this idea of the trajectory between, or the relationship between whiteness as both outside and inside at the same time. And holding that positionality, and then having it then being given back to blackness as a way to become inside again.
Right. Oh, so an easy question. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's, for me, this all goes back to Malcolm X, right? So Malcolm X, famously in autobiography of Malcolm X, there's this famous scene where he's perming his hair, and his friend who's letting the lie sort of straighten his hair has gone to the next room to make a phone call. It's literally burning into his scalp, right? And he runs and he dunks his head into the toilet bowl, right? And that's the way that he sort of removes the lie that is straightening his hair. And he has an epiphany about this later, and he says, well, this is somehow unmanning us, right? And so when I first thought about blondness, I thought about some of the other ways that, from people like Malcolm X, people like the Black Panther Party, people like Kendrick Lamar, who's got his prison braids, how the political is tied into hair in really interesting ways, right? And so then when I thought about the black men who sort of insist on their own individuality and sort of want to be above or beyond politics, right? Which is not to say that every person who dyes their hair blonde does that, but it's just there's this interesting sort of overlap, right? And so that took me backwards to the white Negro, because that's where I feel like that overlap begins with James Dean, who is the ultimate individual, right? And the reason he captures the imagination is because somehow he represents both the individual and the collective at the same time. But it's that sense of particularly white male individuality, right? Oh yeah, that person's a serial killer. That's not me, right? That sense of that every white person is one of one and never represents the community, but somehow every black person always represents the community, right? And so just trying to trace that backwards.
Except the men, I'm going to leave Tiger in his own category. But if you take Kanye and Derek Rodman, both of those guys, blonde, who are involved, oddly, they're the two who are the most involved in politics in terms of their relation to world leaders. So
it's interesting too, because you can say, so let's stick with Kanye for a second, right? Kanye is in a feud with his mentor Jay-Z, right? And Jay-Z has the close relationship with Barack and Michelle, and Kanye has the relationship with Trump, right? And so even there's
and Bush,
right? And Bush. Oh yeah, that was
Bush doesn't like black people.
Right. Well, see, it's funny because for me, the moment of Kanye appearing blonde was the moment where in my head I was like, oh, he's really lost it, right? It's like saying goodbye to the sort of young. There's a joke in a Black Thought song where he says pre-Kardashian Kanye, right? And so there's like the pre-Kardashian Kanye who was more sort of politically invested, and then you have like the post-reality show Kanye who is sort of aligning himself with the other reality show president, you know, superstar, right? And so yeah, I do think that there's a relationship there, and I think the relationship is traceable, you know, back to that moment of engaging in artifice.
And the lack of fixity
Yeah.
in terms of the blondness.
Yeah.
Jenny, I was wondering in your talk, the moment when the neighbor says she won't keep it, I mean, for you, that is, she won't keep innocence. But for me, when I hear that moment relative to a child, it's not the innocence that won't fall into the future, but the beauty associated with the blondness. Everybody knows the child is going to grow up, right? So the question is the child going to grow up with the beauty the child now has? So when the statement is made, she won't keep it, I'm not hearing innocence of childhood. I'm hearing the beauty that comes with the blondness in this moment will go away. And she's just going to join the rest of us in our normal brunette lives.
I feel like I see what you're saying, and I think it's really interesting, but I also think that that childlike beauty is a feminine beauty ideal. So losing beauty is the same as losing youth, is the same as losing innocence. So to me, I mean, and it's such a funny memory because it's a very vivid memory, but we all know how memory works, right? If you remember something so vividly, it's because you remember it over and over again. And so the meanings got overlaid and overlaid and overlaid, and who knows what I really was thinking when it first happened. And it's a memory I hadn't really thought about, although I had sort of kept it until I started thinking about blonde hair. And it is a memory of being told, all this goodness that you have is not going to last. And so it's beauty, but it's also the other things. And I do think there is, that beauty ideal is not disconnected from all the other.
But if it is the innocence, I'm only pushing this because if it is the innocence, why isn't every child told that?
Right. Because every child isn't innocent. I mean, it's because it's racist. That's why. Right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is tied to the whiteness of blondness as that is tied to innocence. Right. So you can't generalize it out to the innocence of childhood without making the equation equal whiteness and beauty.
Yeah. No, totally. I tried to indicate that equation is itself part of the fabrication of that white angelic child innocence white is part of that, right? If that's part of the whole fabrication. Yeah.
And Julia, I was really fascinated with your talk, and I love that you began with talking about environments. The environment of color as changing one's mood. But I began to wonder how preconditioned we are to understand what our relationship to that color should be when we encounter it, rather than, it's a chicken egg situation, rather than the color itself creating the mood in us. You see pink, you're like, oh, sweet. So I'm wondering, and so I have two questions. So one is that, and the other is I have also been doing a lot of interviews of people about their hair in the last year, so I completely understand the kind of preparing oneself to approach strangers to talk to them. But how much do you put pressure on the answers, or do you allow them just to go?
Okay, so the first question, yeah, you're right. I think not a lot of people acknowledge color that it's important because it's I mean, we have eyes, it's how we see things, right? So we're not, I'm not saying most of us aren't. Some of us are sensitive to color if you're fascinated by it or if you study it and stuff, but I think it is somehow back in our minds, that it is somehow influencing the way that we feel. That's what I think. I think that we may not say like, oh, well, this color made me feel this way, but color is like a communication. It's part of the communication. It's what tells your mind, like, you know, when you eat something, for example, and you see something that, like, chicken is green, would you eat it? You know, like.
So it's predetermined in terms of the expectations of what those colors mean.
Yeah. Oh, and the second one, I kind of just want to listen to what they have to say because I don't have the answers, so I'm just really curious, because doing what I do, I just want to understand it more, and I want to understand people, like, well, why do you do this? Like, why do you want this color on your head? Or why now? Why this color?
Do you ever say, that's the wrong color for you?
The only time that I have ever, if I ever said no to anyone, it's usually like if they come to see me. And it's mainly about the bleach process. It's not really about the color. So if, let's say, someone wants something and I know that their hair is gonna be damaged, like, that's when I say no. I'd rather not risk them to have damaged hair than, you know, just because they want this color. So I talk about those things. I talk about the process. But in person, like for the project, when I would go up to someone, I couldn't be like, well, this color looks really bad on you, you know? So it's more of an open conversation, like just hearing them out. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions for each other?
So yeah, Julia, I have a question for you about artifice, because I feel like I'm seeing so many more people with like green or like neon blue, and I feel like I understand when someone is trying to go from, you know, dishwater to platinum blonde, like, you know, there's a certain move that they're making. But what do you think why are so many people going for things that are so unnatural? Like, these colors don't occur in nature, but they're on your head.
So I've noticed this happening 2 years ago. And I don't want to connect the two together, but Trump is a horrible person. And I think there's something, I don't know, that I can't say like this is why, because I don't have proof, but it has happened since he's been elected. Like, people are just making really radical changes with their hair. And so that's why I started asking these questions, like, why are you coming to want, you know, bright hair? Like, so it was like a whole, you know, 2 years, like, people wanting crazy colored hair, and I'm just like, well, this is really interesting. Like, well, but I need to ask why, you know? So, yeah.
Hi, my question is for Jonathan? Yeah, Jonathan. I'm curious, what do you think about Frank Ocean's Blonde album? And the fact that he is on the cover of that album with, I believe, green hair. And then I believe that he was once blonde before that. And also, I guess it's for Claudia and Jonathan. What do you think about Mary J. Blige? And that she's been blonde for, I think, in different shades of blonde for like all of her career.
Yeah, so I wanted to identify like what I repeatedly sort of called like this like masculine blondness, right? And so I want to sort of bracket this off from, you know, sort of queerness, right? And so like Frank Ocean is a queer artist, right? And that like he is tapping into what I would argue he's tapping into like sort of a different representational genealogy than the genealogy of someone like Tiger, someone like Dennis Rodman. You know, these people are not, they're not giving up like their like masculine virility. They're sort of changing the frequency on it and turning themselves into more individuals than they are sort of, you know, giving up something, right? And so I think, I think that, I love that album, by the way, so now I'm like thinking of all the different ways. We can talk later. But I really think that he is very much trying to sort of deconstruct this sort of cisgendered black male, because remember, you know, he was a controversial figure when he first came out. His sexuality was, you know, I mean, I can go back on Twitter and pull up all the stupid things people were saying about him. And so I think that he is evoking, you know, a sort of self-emancipatory, but not at all in the same tradition of like a Kanye or a Tiger Woods or someone like that. So that's how I would answer that question. But I'll let you handle Mary.
Well, I think that for a lot of celebrities who are dyeing their hair blonde, it is a way to open out. I think it's tied to capitalism. And I think it allows them into the mainstream. So people like Mary J. Blige, who's interesting relative to, say, Beyonce, who both of them blonde for a very long time, and both of them, but Mary J. Blige having a niche audience and Beyonce having a general audience. But I don't think that move is any different from Hillary Clinton. Brunette and then blonde for her political career. She loses the election. Suddenly, people run into her. She's gray with brown hair in the mountains. She releases her book, and she's blonde again. Helen DeGeneres, brown hair, into mainstream media, risks coming out in public, but not risking the lack of blondness. So suddenly she's blonde, the wife is blonde, everything is okay, even if I'm gay, because we're all blonde, okay? It's good, we're good. So I think you cannot, you know, the article that I mentioned about blonde women making more money and also marrying men with more money, it's tied up in questions of advancement within capitalism, within white America. The entire Trump family, blonde. Trump was not blonde earlier in his career, but you need the blondness to enter the whiteness, to enter the market. And so, and then when you refuse to do it, like a Rachel Maddow, for example, that means you're radical in some way. You're outside. You're not dependent on mainstream America liking you.
We have time for one more question.
Hello, this is for both Claudia and John. You both kind of touched on freedom being, is knowing our proximity to death. And you mentioned, you know, hipsterism as being a closeness to blackness and in so many ways death as well. So this kind of artifice of proximity, or not artifice, but rather that proximity being, you know, knowledge of the bomb, the slow death of New Age American society, right? But not the visceral, immediate death proximity that we as marginalized black, brown bodies experience of mass incarceration, police brutality, etc. Would you then say that blackness is inherently closer to freedom? Or could you make an argument for that?
I mean, again, to take this back to the source, to the text itself, I think that for Mailer, blackness is closer to, in today's vernacular, like being woke, right? And therefore, it allows for, important insights, right? But the thing that I was at pains to to stress was that those insights were always about the exploration of the individual self, right? So the idea that we live in a white supremacist society that destroys black and brown bodies, that's literally today putting brown people in cages for no reason, right? The idea that we live in this society is somehow less consequential than the sketchy block that you are gentrifying, right? I mean, like, this somehow is allowed to occupy more space, both in the popular imagination and in the individual imagination, right? And so I don't necessarily think that blackness is closer to freedom, but I think that in a weird way, both for the hipster in the 1950s and for the hipster in the 21st century, proximity to blackness grounds one in a way that precludes an engagement with, capitalism and the nature of social reality. That's I guess how I would try to put it.
That's a really good question, and my mind is going in multiple ways, but I'm going to start by saying this thing. White men in the last few years have been committing suicide at a greater rate than anybody else. Anybody else. And you can associate that perhaps with a kind of disenfranchisement, that the idea that I am supposed to be X thing and it's not working out and I give up. So that's, like the same economic positioning for Hispanic or Latinx man or a black man doesn't cause them to go commit suicide because they've been living like this. But for white men, this idea, the aspirational life of arriving at some place and it's not happening, and so it's either meth or it's suicide or it's guns killing people and themselves. So that's been going up. So I don't think blackness is freedom, because if it were, to find yourself in the economic realm of people of color would allow you somehow to feel free. It allows them to feel dead. That's where it took them. In terms of black people, there is no freedom. So, because there is no humanity. Like, I don't give a shit if people dye their hair blonde. I am interested in what is the metaphorical, unconscious associations that allow people to think how they are is not good enough. And if they believe that, where are they going to go? And is it a coincidence that where they go is closer to whiteness? Because for them, that is life. That is humanity. I mean, for black people, we are not human relative to the white gaze, right? It's not like the white gaze says there's another human being. The white gaze says super predator. The white gaze says scary person. The white gaze, all of those things. And it doesn't matter who the white person is. Somewhere unconsciously, that thing is happening. So that is not freedom. There's no equation where blackness and freedom equal each other. If that were the case, we wouldn't be talking about blondness today. Thank you.